I want to tell you about my Aunt Carol, not because she was an extraordinary person in the ways that get written about. She wasn't famous, wasn't powerful, didn't change the world in any measurable way, but because she was one of those people whose presence in a room was felt by everyone in it. The kind of warmth that doesn't announce itself, but that you notice immediately when it's gone. She was my mom's younger sister. She never married, lived alone in a small house across town, worked for 30 years as a bookkeeper for a family-owned hardware store that she loved with the specific loyalty of someone who had chosen it rather than defaulted into it. She had opinions about music the way some people have opinions about religion, deeply, personally, with a certainty that wasn't arrogant but simply was. She knew what she loved, and she loved it without apology. Her taste ran to a very specific era. She was a child of the 60s and early 70s, and the music of that time was wired into her in a way that never loosened. Not nostalgically, not in a "this reminds me of my youth" way. More like that music was the frequency she was tuned to and always had been. Motown, early soul, that particular strain of soft rock that the early 70s produced. The women singers especially, Carole King, Carly Simon, Joni Mitchell, James Taylor. The kind of music that has a quality of afternoon light to it, warm and slanted, that makes you feel like you're sitting somewhere comfortable with nowhere to be. She listened to it constantly, in her car, in her kitchen, on the little portable radio she kept on the windowsill of her living room that she'd had since the 80s and that she refused to replace because it had, she said, excellent tone. She passed away 3 years ago. Heart, sudden, which is the word people use when they mean it happened fast and there wasn't time to prepare, and the people who loved her went from a regular Tuesday to a completely different world between breakfast and dinner. She was 68. She had been perfectly fine as far as anyone knew, and then she wasn't, and then she was gone. My mom was devastated in the specific way that you're devastated when you lose the last person who has known you your entire life. I was gutted in a quieter way, the way you're gutted when someone who was a constant, pleasant feature of your existence is suddenly not there, and the space where they were is just space. The road trip happened about 2 months after she died. I want to give you that context. 2 months out, still in that raw period where grief is not yet a managed thing, but a weather system, unpredictable, arriving without warning in the middle of ordinary moments. I had some business to take care of in a city about 4 hours away, and I decided to drive rather than fly, because I needed the time alone with my thoughts, and because driving has always been where I do my best thinking. Long, flat, Midwestern highway, nothing required of you except to keep the car between the lines, your mind free to go wherever it needs to go. I left early on a Saturday morning, still dark when I pulled out of my driveway, the stars doing their thing, the roads empty the way they are, before the world has decided to start. I had my usual driving playlist going through the car speakers, the kind of mix I'd built over years, nothing special about it, just songs I liked. Background noise for thinking. I drove for about an hour and a half before I stopped for gas and coffee at one of those highway travel centers, the big ones with a dozen gas pumps and a fast food operation, and those particular fluorescent lights that make everyone look vaguely unwell. When I got back in the car and pulled back onto the highway, something had changed with the audio. The Bluetooth had dropped. My phone had gone to sleep in my pocket while I was inside and the connection had cut out, and the car had defaulted to the radio, which was something I almost never used, set to whatever station it had last been, on which I had no memory of setting. I didn't immediately switch back to my phone. The song that was playing was mid-note when I registered it, and I recognized it before I'd consciously processed what I was doing. That way a song you know gets into you before your brain has caught up. It was James Taylor, something in the way she moves. I left it. I drove for a few miles with James Taylor on, and I thought about Carol the way I'd been thinking about her for 2 months. The low hum of missing her that had become the background frequency of my days. When the song ended, I reached to change the station or reconnect my phone, and then the next song started, and I left my hand where it was. It was Carole King. I Feel the Earth Move, which is not a song that gets a lot of radio play anymore, not in the regular rotation of whatever stations still exist. And I noticed that, but only in the vague way you notice things when you're driving and thinking about other things. I drove and listened and thought about Carol, who had played that album in her kitchen every Saturday morning of my childhood when I'd sleep over at her house, who knew every word of every track and sang along without self-consciousness in the way that people sing when they're alone, not performing it, just letting it come out. When that song ended, the next one started, and I want to tell you that by the time the opening notes came through the speakers, I had stopped thinking about the highway ahead of me and was paying a different kind of attention. It was Joni Mitchell, A Case of You, which is not a song that plays on any radio station I have ever been able to find. It is not in rotation anywhere. It is a deep cut from an album from 1971 that people who love Joni Mitchell love with fierce specificity and that mainstream radio does not play. I turned the volume up. I drove and I listened to Joni Mitchell sing about love and loss in that voice of hers. That sounds like it was made in a place with better weather than here. And I thought about Carol, who had played that album in her car for 30 years, and who had once tried to explain to me why that specific song was the best song ever written, and who had done a pretty, convincing job of it. The station ID came on after that. Just a brief break, the kind where a voice says the call letters and the format description, and I turned the volume up further to catch it because I wanted to know what station this was. What station was playing James Taylor and Carole King and Joni Mitchell deep cuts at 7:30 in the morning on a Saturday on a Midwestern highway? The call letters were 4 letters, the way radio call letters are, and I heard them clearly. I'm not going to tell you what they were, because I've spent a long time since that morning trying to find that station, and I've never been able to. And I don't want you to go looking either and come up empty, and have that emptiness be the thing you're left with from this story. So I'll keep the call letters to myself. The format description was, "You're home for the classics you love." I stayed on that station for the remaining 2.5 hours of the drive. I want to tell you what it played, and I'm going to be honest with you that by the 3rd or 4th song I had stopped trying to be a rational adult about it and had simply accepted that something was happening that I didn't have a framework for and that I was going to be present for it rather than argue with it. Carly Simon. You're So Vain, which Carol could sing word for word from the first note, a fact I knew because she had demonstrated this many times. Then a Van Morrison song, Into the Mystic, which was one of the songs Carol played when she was in a particular contemplative mood, a Sunday morning song she called it. Then Don McLean, Vincent, which I had not heard on a radio since approximately never. Then a Roberta Flack song, Killing Me Softly. And I remembered Carol telling me once that she had been in a restaurant when she first heard that song come on the radio, and she had sat completely still through the whole thing, and the waitress had thought something was wrong with her. Then James Taylor again, Fire and Rain, which I knew without knowing that I knew was the song Carol had requested be played at her own eventual funeral, a request my mother had honored 2 months earlier while the rest of us sat in those chairs that funeral homes have and tried to stay assembled. I pulled into a rest area somewhere past the midpoint of the drive and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes. Not crying, or not only crying, just sitting. The radio still on, soft between songs. That particular quiet that radio has between tracks that is different from the quiet of silence. A new song started and I recognized the opening immediately. It was Carole King again. Not Carole King the artist, confusingly, but a Carole King song. A song called You've Got a Friend, which is one of those songs that operates at a frequency just below weeping if you're in the right state to receive it, which I was. I sat in the rest area parking lot, and I let it play all the way through. And I thought about my aunt, who had known every word and who was 2 months gone, and who had loved that specific era of music, the way most people love the people they love, with a fidelity that didn't require explanation. When the song was done, I sat quietly for a minute. Then I said out loud into the car, "I hear you, Carol." And I put the car in drive and got back on the highway. The station played for another 45 minutes, through more of the same, every song recognizable. Every song something she had played or talked about or sung in my presence at some point in my life. And then, about 45 minutes outside the city I was headed to, it did something radio stations don't do. It went to static. Not a station change, not a different format coming through, just static, sudden, and complete, as though the frequency had simply ceased to exist. I tried to find it again. I hit scan. I tried the frequency manually. I drove the next 45 minutes trying the dial at various intervals. Nothing. Whatever station it had been, whatever frequency it was on, it was gone. When I got to the city, I did what you do. I pulled up radio station listings for the region on my phone, cross-referenced the call letters I'd heard with every database I could find. Nothing matched. No station with those call letters listed anywhere in the region, active or defunct. I expanded the search. Nothing. I've searched periodically in the 3 years since. I've never found it. There is no record I can locate of a station with those call letters in that format in that region at any point in recorded broadcast history. On the drive home 2 days later, the car Bluetooth connected immediately and played my playlist without incident, and I listened to it the whole way, and it was fine and normal and completely unremarkable in the way that most things are, most of the time. I told my mom about it when I got back. I sat at her kitchen table, and I told her about the station and the songs and the 2.5 hours of Carol's music on a highway in the gray November morning. My mom listened all the way through without interrupting, which is something she's capable of when something matters enough. And when I finished, she was quiet for a minute. Then she said, "That sounds like her." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Carol always believed that if she were going to reach out to someone after she was gone, she would do it through music. She said that once, years ago, in that way she had of saying things that sounded like jokes but weren't quite jokes. She said words were too easy to misunderstand, but music said exactly what it meant. Music says exactly what it meant." I've thought about that a lot. I've thought about what those 2.5 hours said, if they said something. Fire and rain at the right moment. You've got a friend when I needed it. All those songs from that warm, slanted afternoon light era that Carol loved, because it was the frequency she was tuned to. If it was her, and I'm not telling you it was, I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm just telling you what happened and what I felt. But if it was her, she picked exactly right. She always had excellent taste. My mom has Carol's little portable radio now. The one from the windowsill, the one Carol said had excellent tone. It sits on my mom's kitchen windowsill in the same position, and sometimes when I visit, I'll hear it from the hallway. That warm analog sound of a radio that was built when radios were built to last, playing something from that era. Carole King or James Taylor or Carly Simon floating out into the kitchen where my mom is making coffee. And for a second, just a second, the distance between here and wherever Carol is feels very small, maybe the size of a radio frequency. Maybe that small. Sleep well tonight. Put on something you love, something that means something to you, something from the frequency you're tuned to. Let it play.